What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Today is January 4th of 2024. Hope everyone out there had a good holiday season, enjoyed their new year. We are back here in 2024 with a new video, this time to talk about the airplane collision that occurred at Haneda Airport in Tokyo 2 days ago on January 2nd. In this video, as we always do, we're going to discuss the fascinating numerology around this collision involving a passenger airliner, Japan Air Flight 516, with a Japan Coast Guard craft. Now, although 5 people were killed on the Coast Guard plane, it can be considered somewhat of a miracle that none of the passengers on this plane died. Certainly, if the other plane was just a few feet in either direction, this could have been a much, much greater tragedy. This is the first crash involving fatalities on a Japan Air flight since 1985. So it's been almost 40 years, a pretty good track record. However, this flight was the deadliest single plane crash of all time with 520 fatalities, a lot of people. Now, there was a bigger disaster in France with 2 airplanes colliding, but this was the biggest of all time involving a single plane. So we're going to be discussing how this week's crash connects to Flight 123. But as always, we're also going to look at this skull and bones code, which was so prevalent in 2023, which is the year that Yale University, home of Skull and Bones, turned 322 years old, which is the number on the Skull and Bones emblem. Now, although the calendar has turned into 2024, this riddle is still very powerful. And we're also going to talk about how this connects to 9/11, as well as the destruction of the Twin Towers and Tisha B'Av, which is the Jewish holiday that commemorates the destruction of the 2 temples. This year, Tisha B'Av begins on August 12th, which will be the 39th anniversary of the Japan air crash from 1985. So, without further ado, let's get into some of the slides here. To understand what we're talking about here, it's important to have a firm grasp on the language of Gematria, the numeric underbelly underneath the English language. Simple English Gematria, all of these words summing to 74 in the alphabetic order. In this same numerical method, notice how the word runway sums to 102, whereas runway collision equals 210. Well, this is how the date January 2nd would be written in both the United States and in Japan. Here it's written 102. In Japan, the date would be written 2/1. And with zeros ignored, as we typically do in numerology, this reflects the date of the runway collision. Now, we're going to be talking about how this story is connected to the presidency, particularly that in the United States, the scene of the 9/11 attacks. Back in 2022, a bolt of lightning struck near the White House, killing 3 tourists who were visiting nearby. This happened on August 4th of 2022. August 4th was the 61st birthday of Barack Obama, who was born in the year 61. The name Barak in ancient Hebrew gematria actually means lightning. Now, the reason I bring this story up is because if you measure from that lightning strike on Obama's birthday to the crash at Haneda Airport involving Flight 516, you actually get 516 days on the calendar. If you convert this measurement to months, we find it's a span of 16 months and 30 days. 163 is the ordinal gematria of Barack Hussein Obama. Again, Flight 516 crashing 516 days after this strike at the White House. So we saw the alphabetic order, but there's also another couple significant ciphers, particularly the reverse method that reverses the alphabetic order, Z through A. However, there's another cipher that I find pretty intriguing. It's not on my website yet, but instead of reversing the alphabetic order, you reverse the numbers there. And notice how with this cipher, ordinal mirror, runway collision sums to 516. In another important cipher I teach called satanic gematria, which is primarily structured around the number 666, the phrase twin towers equals 516. And I actually mentioned this number for the first time in a video a couple weeks ago, where the number 516 was coded into a headline about Hulk Hogan's baptism. Now, Hulk Hogan once defeated a tag team called the Twin Towers. And when one of those members of the Twin Towers died, the Big Boss Man, Hogan was exactly 51 years and 6 weeks old, just like Twin Towers in Gematria. In another cipher called Sumerian, which is the alphabetic order times 6, notice how Tokyo sums to 516. Tokyo, the site of Haneda Airport where this incident occurred. In reverse Sumerian, Mercury sums to 516. And those who follow my work know that when it comes to disasters involving modes of transportation, the ancient Roman god of Mercury is highly significant. And when you look at what Mercury rules, all of these elements were found in the 9/11 riddle, the destruction of the World Trade Center, where we had these hijackers taking airplanes over boundaries and crashing them into a financial symbol. Well, the World Trade Center was destroyed in 2001. These are the same 4 digits from the date January 2nd, or the 2nd of January, which was, again, the date of the crash in Haneda. Measuring from the September 11th attacks in 2001 to the crash from earlier this week is exactly 1,164 weeks. In Sumerian Gematria, September 11th equals 1,164. This crash was also 164 days before the birthday of Donald Trump. And as we will see, this is highly connected to Donald Trump. In fact, if you look at my post that I made, which is linked down in the description below, you'll actually find some links to several other posts I made connecting Donald Trump to plane crashes going as far back as 1946, which was the year he was born. Now, the name Donald sums to 119 in Latin Gematria. This Latin cipher is super significant. I think in every video I've made in the past year, I've talked about how this is the most significant in Gematria. Well, again, this happened at Haneda Airport, and if you measure from the date that Haneda Airport first opened, all the way back in 1931, to January 15th, just less than 2 weeks after this crash, we find that the airport turns 1,109 months old, reflecting the date of September 11th. Another really interesting part about this crash is that the video we have clearly shows an airplane with Star Wars livery on it. And I couldn't help but point this out because in the alphabetic order, Star Wars equals 119. And later on in this video, we'll look at a little more about this riddle and former Star Wars director George Lucas. The number of the plane in the crash, too, whether you write out 516, flight 516, or just 516, all of these have gematria of 185. This is the number that Donald John Trump shares with World Trade Center and Solomon's Temple. And we'll talk about that towards the end of this video. The date of this crash had what we call primary numerology of 47. 1 plus 2 plus 20 plus 24. Now, this stands out because later this year, in November, Trump will try to become the 47th U.S. president. And in Gematria, the name Trump has double values of 47 in both reverse and Latin. In our reduction or Pythagorean methods, president, White House, government, Republican, Democrat, all summing to 47, a very significant number. Now, this crash a couple days ago happened 308 days before Election Day on November 5th. 308 is the Latin value of plane crash. The name Donald Trump in reverse also has matching 159 gematria with 516. In fact, president in reverse with the capital letter added gives us a 159. And this is another number I've been talking about lately connected to September 11th, which sums to 1590, just like the World Trade Center in Latin. In fact, this airplane, Flight 516, had taken off from New Chitose Airport, which has matching Latin, ordinal, and reduction gematria with the World Trade Center. On the date of this crash, former President Trump was exactly 322 mercurial orbits old. Again, the Roman god of Mercury, so significant to plane crashes, 9/11. Now, as I pointed out earlier, last year, Yale University, home to Order 322, turned 322 years old in the year 2023. And in Gematria, skull and crossbones equals 223. So this combination of 223 and 322 is of utmost significance. Notice how, with capital letters, the World Trade Center sums to 322. Well, measuring from the destruction of the World Trade Center to the crash at Haneda 2 days ago, we find it was 22 years, 3 months, 22 days between these incidents. So we have both the 223 and the 322 embedded into it. The current Prime Minister of Japan is, get the right page up for you guys, Fumio Kishida, who took office back in the year 2021. And I point this guy out because he has very significant alignments, both in the date he took office and his date of birth, to this plane crash at Haneda Airport. Notice how the name Fumio Kishida has matching 426 gematria with Yale. In standard gematria, Japan Airlines sums to 426. Japan Airlines also has matching 885 gematria with skull and crossbones 322, and skull and bones 322. All with this 885 gematria, a number I focused on a lot over the past year. This crash at Haneda Airport was 22 weeks and 3 days after Kishida's birthday. When Kishida took office in 2021, it was 20 years, 23 days after September 11th. The crash was 2 years, 2 months, and 30 days after Kishida took office. This all in addition to Donald Trump being 322 mercurial years exactly. When Kishida took office in 2021, Haneda Airport was exactly 1,205 sidereal months old. A sidereal month measures a lunar orbit in relation to the stars, whereas a synodic month, or a lunar phase, measures the time between each new moon. Well, in the alphabetic order, the name Fumio Kishida equals 125. In Latin, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida sums to 973. This is a really important number to 9/11 because not only did the World Trade Center open in the year 1973, but it was destroyed during Brown lunation number 973. The Brown lunation number counts every new moon. This began in January of 1923. So the World Trade Center first opened to the public on April 4th. This is the date written 4/4 on the calendar. This crash fell exactly 44 weeks before Election Day, November 5th. On the date of the 9/11 attacks, Fumio Kishida was 44 years and 44 days old. On top of that, he's also got an upside-down 9/11 in the number of days old he was for 9/11. If you instead look at how many lunar months he was, we find that Kishida was 589 sidereal months old for 9/11. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was 55 years and 89 days old on that same date. Well, in Latin Gematria, Donald Trump equals 589, while in Standard, Haneda Airport sums to 589. Looking again at the 223 riddle, I also want to point out how Tisha B'Av this coming year, on August 12th, that means this crash was 223 days before Tisha B'Av. This Yale riddle is also connected to the two Great American Total Solar Eclipses, which create a cross over the United States, just like the bones under the skull creating a cross for Yale. The number 322 is important to the eclipse code, as in astronomy, there's something called the Saros cycle. Currently, there are 40 active Saros series in the solar canon, and eclipses from the same Saros occur 223 synodic months apart. And in ancient Hebrew Gematria, the moon equals 223. Skull and Bones is also known as the Brotherhood of Death. Notice how Skull and Crossbones, Brotherhood of Death, and Death all equal 97 in Gematria. Well, this plane crash, which equals 97 in ordinal, was 97 days before the second Great American Eclipse. Eclipse Sacrifice, also a 97 with single reduction. And once again, there just so happened to be a Star Wars plane in view of this fireball on the tarmac. And in the reverse order, Star Wars equals 97. The phrase total eclipse in Latin Gematria equals 463. Donald Trump was born 4,063 days before Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. This week's crash in Tokyo was exactly 460 months and 3 weeks after the deadly 1985 crash where over 500 people were killed. Now, this is also intriguing because 463 is the 90th prime, and the moon equals 90. The moon also has matching 178 gematria with moon. Donald Trump was born exactly 178 months after Haneda Airport opened. This number was also found in his age on 9/11, 20,178 days old. Donald Trump was born on June 14th of 1946. This was the date of a total lunar eclipse. As we can see here, Friday, June 14th of 46. So the same day that Trump was born, there was a lunar eclipse. Well, if you measure from this crash to the next lunar eclipse, or total lunar eclipse to be specific, we find it was 437 days earlier, and both President and Donald John Trump have this value of 437 in various methods. Donald Trump was also born a span of exactly 774 weeks after Haneda Airport opened. Well, in Sumerian, Japan Airlines equals 774. And on the date of Japan Airlines' last fatal crash in 1985, this occurred during Brown lunation number 774. But of course, there's more. Notice how Haneda Airport opened on August 15th, which is the date leaving 138 days on the year. 138 is the ordinal value that Donald Trump shares with the number 5:16. The World Trade Center, New Chitose Airport, and plane crash also have this 1:38 in Sumerian. But August 15th is also the 227th day of the year. 227 is the ordinal value of September the 11th. In standard, September the 11th also sums to the 227th prime number, which is 1433. Well, Donald Trump was born 14 years, 303 days after Haneda Airport opened. So this just goes to show you, no matter how you work the dates, whether you look at months, weeks, or, as we see here, years and days, the connections are just out of control. So real quick, I want to touch more on this Tisha B'Av riddle. Again, the Jewish holiday that commemorates the destruction of the two temples, very similar to the World Trade Center, right, with the Twin Towers. Well, Tisha B'Av is celebrated on the 9th day of the 11th month on the civil calendar, 9/11. And in Latin Gematria, Tisha B'Av equals 911. World Trade Center buildings 1 and 2 were destroyed on the 11th day of the 9th month. Al-Qaeda terrorist attack equals 9/11 in Gematria. But the other date that you can write, 11/9, November 9th, notice how that also has Gematria of 1109. So Tisha B'Av commemorates the destruction of Solomon's Temple. Solomon's Temple equals 193 in ordinal. And the 1985 crash, the deadliest single-plane crash of all time, happened a span of exactly 193 months before 9/11, which was the deadliest air disaster combined of all time. Before I go on, this 193, this is the 44th prime number. And several slides back, I talked a lot about the number 44. The World Trade Center opened on April 4th, 4/4. But check this out. In ancient Hebrew Gematria, Solomon's Temple, or the First Temple as it's called here, has Gematria of 1423. Well, this week's collision at Haneda Airport happened 14,023 days after the 1985 disaster. 1423, again, the First Temple in Hebrew Standard. This is the 224th prime number. And for this brings us back to the post I made on this whole event. 224, consider how this is the first week of the year 2024, 224. The date even, 1/2/24. This crash fell a span of 224 days before the next Tisha B'Av on August 12th. This was also a span of 2 months and 24 days after Yale's anniversary, without the end date here, 2 months and 24 days from Yale's 322nd anniversary to the plane crash. Also, the 1985 disaster, August 12th, it just so happens that August 12th is the 224th day of the year. So measuring from that date to the second day of 2024 was the 224th prime number with a 0 between it. A little obscure here, perhaps, but this is all very solid. This is strong numerology. And another 224 is George Lucas with capital letters. And of course, George Lucas, the creator and director of the original Star Wars films, which we see attributed directly in front of this collision. Star Wars with that special 119 Gematria. On the date of this crash, George Lucas was exactly 985 lunar phases old. Now, 985, a lot like the year of the Flight 123 disaster, But notice also how Jesus equals 985. And Jesus was central to the World Trade Center destruction, as the towers stood in the shape of the number 11 in the 11th state, destroyed on the 11th of the month. Jesus also equals 74 in the alphabetic order. And the 9/11 attacks occurring right along the 74th meridian, right there in New York City, the World Trade Center, just a few blocks west of this 74 line on the globe. The name George Lucas also sums to 113 in ordinal. And if you measure from 9/11 to January 2nd, you get 113 days. And of course, it was also 3 months and 22 days after 9/11. But I pointed that out earlier. We have the double 223, the 322. Also, I didn't point out Trump's age. 77 years, 202 days. 77 is the value of World Trade Center, Haneda Airport, and the First Temple. 202 is also the First Temple, Skull and Bones, and total solar eclipse. In Latin, runway collision, also with the 202. But the last thing I want to look at here, before I sign off, is a little bit more about this number 423. Now, earlier, with the slides, we saw this connection with Solomon's Temple and these plane crashes. This is such a key part of the riddle. Again, I don't understand everything about numerology, but I know that this is phenomenal. But this 423, this is a number connected to the moon. And let me explain how. In standard Gematria, the moon equals 423. The moon at its equator is 2,160 miles across. And this also yields a 423. So here we have the crash of flight number 516. Well, notice how 516 also gives us this 423, which makes this 423 a little bit more interesting. But what about this? If you measure between the two Great American Total Solar Eclipses, from August 21st of 2017 to April 8th of 2024, I can't think of much more to say waiting for this darn image to load. It's almost like it knows I'm live streaming. Anyway, from this eclipse to this one, we get a span of 2,423 days. So here's another 423. Now, when we look at the destruction of Solomon's Temple, there's a really interesting fact that's worth sharing. Wow, my internet's dying. I can't believe this. Come on, guys. Sometimes I think I make a video that's just too good. Well, I don't know what to say. Anyway, a lot of rabbinical scholars believe that Solomon's Temple was destroyed in 422 BC. And if you add the number 422 to 2001, the destruction of the World Trade Center, you get a sum of 2423, like the number of days between these two American eclipses. Well, the number 2423 is the 360th prime number. And the word runway has a 360. So I really wish I could have brought these pages up to prove to you guys what I'm talking about. But, you all can do your own research as well. I never lie on this channel. That's what makes this work so beautiful, is that everything I share is 100% fact. If you want to determine it's just a coincidence and that there's nothing more to see, then that's fine. But I think when you dig and look at the numbers, it really brings the fact that we live in some sort of geometric numerical construct into focus. But I don't want to get into theories here. I just like sharing numbers. So check out the links in the description if you want to see more, or more on previous work I've done with Donald Trump and plane crashes. All very interesting stuff. So with that being said, peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.